And we're recording. So. Welcome, everyone. Laura, we miss you. And anyone who's watching this at a future date, welcome to meeting 4 of the topic of seeking partners with creating the future. So before we hit record, we did some check-ins, and now we could do a round of speed awesomes before we jump into the content du jour. So what is your speed awesome, Miss Shiva Berman on mute? I picked the one person on mute.
So this is something I shared yesterday with Rebecca and the cohort. My group that we went through the first session of creating the future together. And my husband was giving a talk to a group of educators, psychologists, speech therapists, and all of that. And before his talk, he had asked me, he presented a few things to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Great." And the whole idea was around integrated medicine, and how that's beneficial to the patients and to the, providing the right kind of services and all of that. And so what I talked to him about, well, why would the professionals want to do it? And this notion of stone soup, right? And why would they want to be a participant in integrative healthcare? It's a lot easier for them to just do their thing and not worry about what everybody else is doing or whatever. So he presented the stone soup part of this to the group. And when the questions and answers came, that was what they all focused on. Not the rest of the presentation, but this 5 minutes that he gave on stone soup and thinking about the conditions that need to be in place for people to bring in their carrots and onions and all of that. And the condition that they all got stuck on was, are people hungry enough? And that's some of the things that we had talked about. Are people hungry enough for this? And then somebody came up with, well, how do you make them hungry? How do you get them to feel hungry? And that notion of, well, you can't really get anybody to do anything, but what are some of the things that need to be in place? And, it was the fascinating $1 million question. But what it did is it really changed the way people were looking at this, my husband included, this notion that, in order for collaboration to occur, what do people really need to know and feel and do and be before they can get there, and what are the conditions? So people left with that at the end of the day, which was a completely different, message that he was trying to give them, which was the convoluted system and the plight of the patients and all of that. But people worked. Actually left with that notion, that mindset. So it was fascinating. It was awesome. I thought it was awesome. I witnessed it and I thought it was awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And what that makes possible, it's such a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Both of you are on mute, aren't they? Aren't you? I'm getting the message. All right. My awesome is my plum tree, which is absolutely glorious this year, and probably is glorious every year, but this year it's simply spectacular. And on Saturday mornings, my French instructor comes to have coffee and teach me French. And he walked in through the gate, and I said, "Look up." And when he got to the door, he stood there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And then he got to the door, he was in tears. And we spent a good deal of time talking about nature and the wonder of repeated springs and what that meant to him as a person who is an emigre from Beirut, from Lebanon. And it was just a kind of a marvelous thing. And so that's my plum tree.
I will go. 2 quick awesomes. One, I have been posting a lot of photos on Facebook. I went to the best wedding I've ever gone to. this weekend, which was, this is a couple who initially got married 33 years ago. They have, then they got divorced. Then they got together again. They got divorced, I would say, after about maybe 15, 20 years. They got together again. Then they split up again. And this is the third time's the charm. And what was remarkable about it, there's maybe 60 or 70 of us. It was a small chapel, non-denominational. Every single person there was so filled with love and excitement and joy that these two people were together. And it was just, I'm getting chills even just thinking about it. It was just the most joyful. Everybody was just like, yeah. We were just so happy to be there. And while you're usually happy for a bride and groom, this was something I'd never experienced. Every single person there, this was the best thing they could have done. And so that was very, very awesome. It was just the most joyful several hours. And so that's one of my awesomes. And then the other one, Anne, you reminded me of as we were talking a little bit earlier, before this meeting, in the work that you're doing with the reading theater, the Readers Theater. Dimitri and I have been reading aloud to each other A Wrinkle in Time. And we've always read to each other. It started out when we would take long road trips and there was stuff we wanted to read, and I was basically his books on tape. We would read together, we'd read a chapter, and then we'd talk about it for the next 6 hours. Before we realized that the movie was getting horrible reviews, we were going to go see it, and he's always loved the book. And so I bought the book, and we have been reading a chapter a night. And it's just delicious. I've never read it. I've never ever read it. So that's been very joyful.
I guess an awesome is my father has reached out this week wanting some help, I think through the lens of me being a catalytic listener to him, because he's scheduled a meeting with the dean of one of the schools of like public policy at BSU or something. And I think from the other conversations my father has had with me and starting to really sense how does he feel when people are giving him advice. And we started having that conversation recently. So if that's how you're feeling, how does it feel when you tell other people your idea of what you should do? So he sent the whole email chain, which a lot of it was scheduling, and a lot of it was that he sent his resume to the guy. Like that's how you introduce yourself, is you send, your resume. And then, but he sent to me, because we're preparing, I said, what conditions need to be in place for us before we have this conversation that you want me to listen to you about this meeting on Thursday? So he sent, I'm going to send an email. And he wrote there, to use your words, when I think about what good will look like at the end of this meeting, and he noted some of the things, and we have an appointment tonight after this meeting, because it was like creating conditions for us to talk versus him. What always happens when he calls, and if I call him, is that I said to him, I will be showing up and listening, and I will be telling you what I'm hearing. And that it's nice that he has reached out, because I think he sees and senses a lot of times what happens, because he does want to make a better world, yet he shows up with his idea and people don't say, okay, we'll do what you said. So maybe there's a different way for him to be when he somehow got a meeting with the dean of the School of Public Policy. So it's pretty awesome that he's asked for that, because he continues to find, how can I be of value in this world? What am I doing? Even though we talk about what it means to be, and the biggest, he wants to feel that he is doing something. So what conditions for success can I create for him that he feels good about Thursday? So that's coming up after this meeting. So
that is awesome, Rebecca. Just in a short time to have traveled so far. He's just doing amazing work. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. He's been my focus for a few years now. So, and I started to think about, okay, now as I turn my eyes, yes, and to my mother, so thinking about, my relationship with her too. And I've come to notice, and just as a side about catalytic listening, one other thing that I find that I do, which is not creating conditions for success, is I interrupt with more questions. I'm not interrupting with my story or advice, yet I'm interrupting with more questions, and other people may roll out their story in a different way than me. So something about, keeping your mouth shut and being comfortable, and let's hear the broad context they give you, because they may or may not get to the thing you're wondering about. Yet it's this thing I do to my mom because I also want to know all the details, and they may come out. So my practice is focusing on the not interjecting with more questions, because I've noticed that's what I do in my excitement to hear more is as I cut her off before she gets to tell the whole thing, which means I probably do it with other people too. So it's pretty awesome when you can notice that and talk about it out loud and not feel like crap about yourself, because you're feeling like I'm growing, I'm learning.
It's a practice, not a perfect.
It is. Okay, so I sent out just in time a very quick recap from our last session on the 28th. And to ground us all in that, we spent our time on the 28th talking about what we want our sleuthing efforts to make possible, and how it's often an easier way to introduce that question is to first identify the for whoms that we noted around sleuthing. So we talked about people we invite to engage with us, whether they say yes or no, and noting also they could say yes down the road. So it's not a once and done kind of lights out thing for those people. And all the ripples from those people, because we know the power of that authentic invitation, a heartfelt invitation to a conversation, and that they may also then at any point share with us intentional connections they could make for us with their ripples. People who will be reading this story as it unfolds. And we talk specifically about people who are interested in partnering in their own spaces. Oh, we lost Hildy, but we're recording. When she looks up, maybe she'll see that she's gone. There could have been your computer is about to reboot message that was on her screen. So we will keep going here. So people who are interested in partnering in their own spaces. So maybe even just seeing there is a different way to be in relationship with other people. She's back. Is that...
Great, the camera's not working. Can you guys hear me?
We can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My camera's not working. I quit. I just quit. Sorry.
We talked about us, the current and future teams of creating the future, our global community, moving our mission forward, noting that every single ripple is moving our mission forward in creating a more healthy and humane world. And also the people who come and knock on our door. And it could be any kind of inquiry. It could be partnering. It could be, I'm interested in you. That's the invitation to the conversation. And I noted in bold Shiva's brilliant statement of opening doors will open us, as it was worthy of a nice bold inclusion in the notes, because it was really a very powerful truth. When we talked about what this process will make possible, we talked about anyone we have a first conversation with will be heard, be excited, feel this as a breath of fresh air, feel valued and that they matter, be appreciative as we are creating a relationship as a radical act, as Laura has boldly stated, another truth. Be invited to engage in a process of creation together, that sense of joy of finding my peeps. Wow, there's more people out there who think kind of what I'm thinking. Be met where they are, knowing that we'll be showing up as catalytic listeners, seeing and sensing where they are in the continuum of potential. They can be pleasantly surprised that this is really what we say it is when we have an invitation to a conversation. gives words and language to their thinking, and that we'll all be sharing together because we're building on the collective wisdom. And to feel what it means to actually be creating, to co-create something together. Then as we reflected back together, when we talked about what's important to us, relationships, no surprise, communication, and the beauty that this is all open source. Everything we're creating at Creating the Future is open and accessible to the world. We're not back in our skunk works putting things out on the production line as finished projects. The strengths that we have to build on are many. That came with the resonance and consistency in our thinking, our stories, the power of this being an authentic invitation, that this is truly relational through and through, not getting to know you, so I'm going to ask you for something. The commitment to the framework, which gets back to that consistency and rhythm of being, the language and phrasing, and the harmony we feel in walking our talk. And then as far as what matters most to us in our values, that sense of joy and authenticity, the kindness that comes forward as we value other people, integrity, the consistency of that in truth, and how we deeply, when we say we walk our talk, it is with deep intentionality. The value of listening catalytically and honoring relationships as a steady through line. So that gave us the good groundwork for today's conversation to explore then, if those are the outcomes we're seeking, what we want our sleuthing efforts to make possible for those many for whom's, what conditions will create that? What would people need to know and have and understand, to believe, to be assured, and be comfortable with? So as we had that refresher reminder of our last session, are there other thoughts or reflections that have popped for you in the last 2 weeks to add to this?
So I don't know if this is the right time or the right place to be asking this, but one of the things that came to my mind, and this is in conversation I was having with a friend, and I'm talking about, the potential to bring out the best in each other. And she said to me, well, what do you mean? What's the best? What are you really specifically talking about? And I found myself going back and forth on, well, what do I think of as the best in people? Are we talking about their best? I mean, there's so many categories you can put this under, right? So the best professionally, the best in relationships, the best in this or the best in that. Or you can say we're talking about, the notion of integrity, the notion of truthfulness, the notion of this, the notion of that. Or we're talking about, so I do wonder if there needs to be, when we start this engagement and we do talk about the potential to bring out the best in people, organizations, systems, or whatever, I do wonder if there is more definition that needs to be there. I find that I need to know more as to specifics, because someday somebody is going to say, well, what do you mean by that? Just like I was asked. And so but again, I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up or the right place or not. I just sort of need to know, what do we really mean in creating the future when we talk about, the best in people could be everybody should aspire to be a bodhisattva, right? But is that what we mean, or what are we really talking
And
and so what does
no, I wasn't saying and, I was saying Anne, who has been chastising for a long time of what that brings out. That bringing out the best, that there's a sense of I'm not living up to my potential, which we are all told in 5th grade. You're muted, Dan.
Okay. Well, I like that. I don't think it's not the time to bring it up, because one of the things that comes to my mind when I go back and forth over the specifics of bringing out the best is who are we to judge whether the best is being brought forth or not? And the answer is we're not judging that, what's coming forth is what's possible to come forth at this time. And but it's the openness, the willingness to enter into the space, and the willingness to collaborate, I guess, is it's just not to be obstructive. Yeah, that's what I've been looking for, is Shiva has opened it up again as a very important thing. It is when you come to me and you say, well, we want to bring out the best in people, I think about myself, or I think about the other people. And if I think about myself, then I'm back in Barnard College with Mrs. McIntosh saying, you're not living up to your potential. But having what first attracted me to this was the fact that I was having so much trouble working with groups of people. And it was partly because I wasn't listening. It was partly because I had no idea what catalytic thinking was about. And so I was not listening, and I was not able to evoke conversation. I didn't know how to ask questions. But so what I wanted was for the group to work together and be creative. And that was really as much as possible in that moment, in that room. And that, as far as I'm concerned, still remains the best in terms of a group. And I'm really not sure how to go into the individuals. I mean, I have my own sort of amorphous understanding, but I haven't given it that much thought yet. So, was that helpful?
I think also it's when we say best, it could be if we're being catalytic listeners in the situation with an individual or a group, it could be a really crappy situation. So, in this moment with this person, I am connecting and supporting them. They felt heard, whatever it's going to look different every time. So it's not that we're trying to get them to reach for the stars or anything like that. It's not a set range of what best is. It's when we're really present with the situation or with ourselves. What does good look like in this moment, painful or joyful?
But that's from our side. In other words, I mean, what you just said is that's from what we go in the room with, armed with the framework, and that's what we are reaching for, is that to listen, to hear, to. But how do we equate that with the line bringing out the best in people? Because we are reaching for that best. And what Shiva's question said to me was, so what are we reaching for? And do we have, I question our right to say what that is. I think, what we really are hoping for is to open up that person to do the best they can right now.
Exactly. What we're able to do is create conditions for that person to step into. And it is creating conditions that allow people to be the best of what it is to be human at that moment, wherever they are. And if they're in a crappy place, sometimes the best of what it is to be human is just to feel, oh God, at least somebody's listening to me. At least the fear and anxiety is quieting down for just a second. But all we can do is create conditions for others to either step into or not. And we can create favorable conditions or we can create crappy conditions. And the reason that we are all constantly told that we're not living up to our potential is because the systems that we have all grown up with for centuries and millennia create conditions that bring out the worst in us. And that's why we don't live up to our potential. And that's why we're all told, you know, you've got this potential. And none of us know, okay, so if we've been told it for decades, and yet none of us know, well, how do I reach for my potential? I have no clue. Why? Because the systems are so stacked to bring out the worst in us that we can't reach for our potential. We don't even know how. We don't know what the system would look like if it did. But really, bottom line, the only thing that any of us can do is create conditions that lead hopefully to something good. And the something good, knowing the brain science, is that we're not being led by the fear and survival and the tamping down of our reason, that we're able to access to the best of our ability, even if it's for a split second where we can see something and then we lose it. But we're able to access what it is to be human, which is reason and wisdom and compassion and creativity. And if we can see a glimpse of that, even if we can just see, oh God, I feel heard. I feel compassion. I feel somebody's being compassionate towards me. I'm not crazy for just a second. All we can do is create those conditions. And knowing what we know now that we didn't know millennia ago about what the brain does. We're in a much better position to say, oh, wow, I can create fear or I can create comfort. I can tamp down that fear and maybe give a little bit of access to seeing a glimmer of hope. And really, truly, the best we can do is to create the conditions to allow people to access the best of what it is to be a human being on planet Earth. And I don't know if that helps me.
So I do appreciate that, and I mean, there's a lot of wisdom here, and you know, and again, I don't want to take our time talking about this if this is not what the intentions are for today. But I think about when we create the condition, you know, all we can do is create the conditions for the people to be the best they can be in that situation at that moment, right? And yet at the same time, we have our own definition of what that is. And I agree with your definition, you know, absolutely. Compassion, kindness, you know, creativity, all of that. But that's our definition of what's best. You see what I'm saying? So yes, I can say, I can do whatever I can to create the conditions for you to be as compassionate and kind and generous and all of that you can possibly be. That might not be what somebody
and we're not defining that. What we are defining very clearly is that the best is, if we were to look at this in a very binary way, which we don't, but if we were to look at this in a very binary way, we can either act out of the fear center of the brain, or we can act out of the center of the brain that is the house of compassion and reason and wisdom and all of that. There is none of that in the amygdala. There is none of that in the hypothalamus. That all exists up here. And the conditions we create can either trigger the stuff at the back of the brain or can trigger the stuff at the front of the brain. And that's the conditions that we can create. And the best of what it means to be human is to be able to access the front of the brain. That is the difference between us and the rest of the animal world. And that's the best of what it means to be human. What each of us believes is quote, best about that, totally cool. If you're into compassion and kindness, awesome. If you're into, I can be the best at whatever, awesome. But you can't be any of those definitions of best if you're operating out of this. And that's the conditions that we're talking about creating.
No, and I do get that. And again, I do agree with you that to me, that is the best. But somebody might say, my best is when I'm the most competitive. Right? Somebody might say my best, they are thinking with this part of their brain.
They are.
Right? But they might say my best is when I'm competitive.
And that's great.
But if
seriously,
No, I understand that. So bringing it back to the framework of collaboration and, wanting to, create this future that's going to have the highest potential for humanity, then is competition you see what I'm saying? So there are things that I'm not certain about at this point. For instance, I know for sure that we are not the only animals on this planet that think with this.
Right.
I'm a scientist, and I've
Right.
been reading about this for years. So the whole notion of so that we can think with here and have compassion, they have compassion, they have all that, right? So I think that again is the idea of comparing and judging and all of that. And so again, I agree with you. I'm just thinking that once we go to people and say, we're here to create the conditions that bring out the best in people, but the best in organizations, well, they would say, what do you mean by the best in organization? Our organization is pretty fine. We don't need to bring out the best. We're doing great, right?
Well,
So,
let me do a couple things, and then I want to bring it back if Rebecca wants to move the conversation. We're inviting a conversation. We're not there to tell anybody anything.
right.
And so the answer to, well, what do you mean the best is, I don't know. What do you think the best is? What does best look like to you? Where do you see people performing at a level that creates amazing all around them? And where do you see back, where is it working? Where is it not working? What does good look like to you? We're there to invite a conversation and not to tell anybody anything. And we're there to ask. If what we say generates conversation because we've come up with taglines that encourage conversation, then that's great. The answer to the competition thing is it depends on what you're competing for. Just as an aside, if you're competing for the means versus competing as the ends, if you are competing for the means to, for instance, competition for funds, that means that I may die. My organization may die. That's competition out of fear. If you're competing for the end results, as in I'm an athlete and I'm going to be the best I can be, then it is a very different story. And that's just that. And again, that's an aside. But the bottom line is inviting that question, inviting that conversation of, let's talk about best. What does best look like in your world? What does it look like to you? When do you see that happening? What are the conditions that are in place when you see that best happening? Inviting that conversation is way better than what the hell I think best means.
And what I'm hearing you say is that in short version is that we're creating conditions of where we can get people to get beyond their own reactions in the amygdala and the hypothalamus and just work with the frontal lobes. And if that's all we do, I just had a conversation with a friend who is absolutely in a swivet about whether she was going to a job review, and she was terrified. And there's no one in this world more suited and more successful at what she does. And she was going to have a terrible day, a terrible night before, and a terrible meeting because she was totally paralyzed by fear. And all I did was I said, well, so the amygdala seems fine. What else can you do? And it changed it, But she's a grown and very sensible lady. She knows better, but she had not the slightest idea that that's what she was working with. And maybe that's really all we're saying is we want to open a conversation that will help you get beyond the amygdala and the hypothalamus and work more frequently, as often as you possibly can, with the best part of your brain.
Thank you. That helps.
Helps me too.
Very much so. Very, very much so. And it is clear you're in wordsmithing mode, Anne, so I deeply appreciate it.
So as we continue to tap that beautiful frontal lobe in this conversation, we are going to identify what conditions need to be in place for the outcomes we talked about last time, and we have many for whoms. I think there always ends up being overlap in some conditions for whoms that we've identified. We can begin if anyone has a certain particular for whom. When I look at the list, to say people we invite to engage with us is a great one to start with, because we're talking about our sleuthing efforts, knowing that there are many other for whoms. If people feel okay about that, then we could talk about what conditions need to be in place for people we invite to engage with us, whether they say yes or no, around the outcomes we are seeking. So for them to be excited, what would they need to know? What would they need to see, believe, be assured of, for them to be excited about this invitation to a conversation?
Well, obviously, they're excited about the potential, right? Excited about, in some ways, I think we need to sort of know a little bit more about them, right? What excites them? You know, I would say what excites me is the opportunity to learn and grow. But for other people, it might be, you know, the opportunity to send my people over to you and have them, you know, collaborate with you on this one thing, or the excited about the opportunity of together going at this problem I just can't get around, or, you know, any of those kinds of things. And I think it's important to sort of try and figure out maybe some of, you know, what has life been for them, right? And who they are. So the better we know them, obviously, the better we can bring in something that might be exciting.
We need to know more about them, and we know they need to feel that we are relevant, and that gravitas or integrity, whatever, that we're authentic.
So what conditions would need to be in place for them to feel that we are authentic?
Well, they'd have to know a little about us. So
Stories. They'd need to be able to see. You can see the potential in a story like that.
referrals. Renee's sister.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Sometimes a story, a question. Depending on if we're able to have the conversation, sometimes a question is, I hadn't thought about that. Had an interesting experience this past weekend at the wedding. We knew we were going to see people who knew us in a prior life 20 years ago. Many of them hadn't. We knew we were going to see a lot of people that we've never met, and a lot of people who knew us a long time ago as something. They knew us as the founders of the diaper bank. And we knew that no matter what, we were going to get the what do you do question. So it was either going to be what do you do or what are you doing now? And we made a pact with each other that we weren't going to answer the question, that the answer to the question was going to be, let me tell you about what's really exciting in our lives right now, and eventually be able to ask them, so what's exciting in your life right now? And when I talked about what was exciting, it's the fact that I get to hang out all day long with people who are really focused on bringing out the best in what it means to be human. And that we're looking at systems change so that systems will bring out the best in us, because so many of the systems, and I'd look them straight in the eye and say, so many of the systems we all encounter every day just really bring out the worst in us. And I was so amazed at how many people went, oh yeah, the HR system, and oh yeah, this, and oh yeah, that, because they just immediately went to it. And so just, you know, having something that opens that door, sometimes it could be very small. It could be just a question or a very small statement. And then it was deliciously fun, just as an aside, to say, so what's really fun in your life?
Is when we say being excited, do we also mean being curious, intrigued, and all of that?
Love that. Love that. Yes. I think it's even more than excited.
Yeah.
So in order for them to feel curious, intrigued, what conditions would be in place? You know, what would they need to feel? What would they need to be assured of? Hearing, knowing.
There's something about
Again,
the continuum that's popping for me.
About what?
The continuum that's popping for me. That is, depending on where they are in the continuum of potential, about whatever they're thinking about at that moment. So if it is, because what was occurring to me is sometimes the thing that will intrigue them and make them curious is if they see something that will get them past something that's frustrating them. And it's not that they're a frustrated human, it's that about this thing that's on their mind, it's resonating for them as ooh, yeah, that could link to this. And again, I think that has to do with our having the conversation and knowing them to be able to find that out. But there's something about it will certainly intrigue me and get me curious if it can get me past something that's had me stuck.
And prior to the first conversation, it's very possible that we do some research and find out what we think might intrigue them, what we think is going on with them, what is showing in the materials that they put out, in the words that they use, in the way in which they present themselves, or in the way we observe them in action. And then the questions we pose are relevant to that.
And similar to the wedding situation and what you just shared, Hildy, it's the power of normalizing why just to normalize and point to the reality that so many workplace systems are bringing out the worst in people, and that sense of relief because you don't usually, if you're in a system that's unhealthy, hear people talking about this whole system is set up to bring out the worst in us. It's more oftentimes a culture of that department is such a jerk to work with. Like I'm thinking the kinds of conversations you hear when you're within an unhealthy system. Yet to be able to look up and see it, it's far bigger than me. It's not, it's this, the reason that I'm having a trouble with the people in that other department is because we don't know each other and I was told they're jerks. You know, it's like, oh, I don't really know the people in that department. So it gives some sense of relief and hope even in that moment. It's not me.
And the reason that the system doesn't work is nobody ever asks the questions.
Two thoughts just occurred to me as you were saying, you know, maybe the reason we're not getting along is because I was told you're jerks. Why would that interfere? I can't say the number of times when I was in my consulting days when I was going to do a facilitation with a board, and I would do my homework beforehand, talking to each board member, and I would be told who the difficult one was. And I was always told, watch out for her, or she's just, and within 3 minutes, they wanted to know, she's like a lamb. How did you get that to happen? And it was because I listened to her and listened for what her outcomes were and her strengths and her values, and were able to resonate with that, because she wouldn't have been on the board if she was, a jerk, as you said, Rebecca. And so there's something powerful in identifying the outcomes and the strengths and the values when we listen to someone, to be able to bring that out, to know what they're curious about. The other thing that occurred to me while you were talking was in terms of what we would see, especially if they are frustrated about something, is people tend to post about that in social media. They don't even realize they're doing it. But you look through their thread and you see how many times they're posting about something that's annoying them, that how come people won't just realize, those kinds of are observing, whether it's a Twitter feed or a Facebook feed or whatever, people post about what frustrates them all the time. It's sort of like when we teach catalytic listening, and we talk about the fact that the most meaningful things that people are being really honest when, if we listen for what they say under their breath. That's where the gold is. And social media is like entirely what they say under their breath.
Rebecca, can we go to the us people? Because I think that what I'm hearing so far for a lot of this list, it's the same thing that is needed for people to be open and comfortable and interested and intrigued.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, it's a different story, both us and the global community. And that I'm curious to know where we would go with that.
Sure. Let's go there now, Anne.
Thank you, Rebecca.
So for whom of us creating the future in our global community, what conditions would need to be in place for us to be excited, curious, intrigued?
Well, the thing that we had said that sleuthing would make possible for creating the future's mission. It would raise consciousness. It would, we would have conversations that further the mission. That we might leave with a new question. That it makes the mission alive. That our sleuthers will be living the mission, was what we said that sleuthing would make possible for us. And so much of that feels like what we were talking about, conversations that further the mission. We'll be having conversations, we'll be getting to know people, we'll be leaving with a new question, we'll be learning.
So what has to be in place for us to do that, feel that, is a few conversations, right?
Yeah, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of what needs to be in place for someone to want to have conversations with us, that they feel valued and that they matter. I'm looking at the notes that you sent, Rebecca. They're just so meaty. They're so good. They need to feel valued and that they matter. Part of that is what are we going to be doing to create that? That's actions. But what will make them feel valued and that they matter? And we keep coming back to a conversation.
Huh.
And I'm just really resonating off of the that they're intrigued and want to have the conversation, because we've talked so much when we created the flow chart of what the sleuthing process would look like. It was that we were going to have conversation before we had the conversation. That we were going to sort of introduce ourselves via social media or via wherever, via a referral, via whatever it was, that it hit those intrigue buttons. That was, I'm intrigued to know more about you, and I'm hoping you're intrigued to know more about me. But I'm not intrigued, as Rebecca said earlier, because I'd like to put my hand in your wallet. I'm intrigued because I think you're interesting. And I'd like to have a conversation. And I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I loved your story before, Rebecca, because I don't know where it's going to. We never know where it's going to go.
And each time, so I'm thinking about each one of these conversations is going to then see, what do we know about this person already? What are we seeing and do we already have this relationship with them? So it feels like in each time, then we tailor our invitation, as we always do, to reflect what we know about them, why we want to reach out to them. Like, it's almost like, well, what conditions need to be in place in the initial invitation? Whether we know someone intimately well, or maybe it's, based on, do they know and love us? Do they not? Whatever kind of, it's going to look different every time. Yet there's certain questions we ask when we go to prepare to write the invitation.
I also, as we think about this, and maybe this is something that has already been thought about and decided on, is, I in my mind, I see us having a conversation with hundreds of people, right? So the logistics of having conversations with hundreds of people and all the information that we are going to gather about not just individual, but their, what intrigues them, what are they excited about, what is the future that they see, all of that stuff. Do we have the capacity to actually keep track of all of that and be able to access it at any time? Because it is possible that, a few of us might have the conversation, and then, because of, logistics, we won't be able to get back to that person for 6 months later, and are we going to remember everything they said? Are we going to have a place where we can refer to and say, the last conversations we had, this is as far as we got in knowing them? Do we have all of that?
That's part of the brilliance of Laura coming into our community, when we talk about systems, processes, vessels of stuff, that this is the very, very first place to play with it, because we're hot on this project and we're going to be starting conversations of what is captured, how is it shared, how is it organized. All of that this is our first, you could say, demonstration project of this piece of the infrastructure that needs to be in place for our conditions for success.
I'm smiling. I'm looking at my notes from last time, and we, among the people that that we had asked who our for whoms were, some were people who say no to the invitation, and what it would make possible for them, what our sleuthing efforts would make possible for people who say no to the invitation for whatever reason. and I'm sort of smiling at what my notes say we said, which I hope I didn't just make up. The sensation that the door is open when you're ready, that we keep in connection with people we like, that they are aware of possibilities, that we and they have fun, feeds their curiosity, which is exactly what we're talking about with everybody else. So what we're really talking about is staying connected to people that we want to be connected to. And just, as you noted, she was just having more of those conversations and getting out there. And
in looking back at my notes on top of the flow chart that was from the November kind of meeting, so back to where you said about the invitation to a conversation, we talked about a condition for success being around needing some, we loosely called it canned stuff, which I think speaks to stories.
I'm going to share the screen as you're talking, Rebecca, if that's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. Your notes, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, because then we had a follow-up meeting where I scribbled all over this flow chart that Hildy's showing right now. When we talk about starting at the beginning of 1, the people we find through research, and 2, who do we already know? And if we already know these people, we can skip a couple boxes ahead. So then when we have an abundance of all these other people that we need to connect with, that we can matrix it and that would determine the flow of who are we going after we talk about who are already the people we have relationships with, like who's in your network, Shiva, and yours, Anne, like just right there, we've got a whole list of humans to start having conversations with. And, in the whole sense of if they know and love us, then there are some boxes that are skipped in this journey. Then I have in the invitation to a conversation is that sense of what would we need is some canned stuff. And that maybe the certain, like we've talked, are there certain stories we want to have captured and already posted on our website someplace? Is a manifesto about us already posted up there? Is what we mean when we say partnering more prominent on the website? Like you can't miss it. You trip on it when you come in the front door. And that's getting very much into the conditions turning into the actions. And in that invitation to the conversation, it would be, would love to explore whatever it is with this person and hear your experiences and insights. And
Rebecca, talk a little bit more about the manifesto as you see it.
I think that it's come up in many different project meetings for years. And when I think of it, it's that kind of very prominent statement of who we are. Who are we? What are we seeking? What do we mean when we use whatever words it is in the manifesto? So when we are you are already part of this community if you are X. What things we say verbally whenever we convene people together around the mission that honors and has people feel like, oh, this is not an organization. This is actually a movement to create a better world, which I'm already doing. So I'm now like that sense of community and belonging, whoever is looking at it, and then also it being very, very out there and saying what we mean when we want to scale this movement, that we, what does that look like? We're not quite sure yet. So I think about when we talk, the things we talk about here about a highly networked platform for people to step into. I think there's some, maybe if not, and maybe it fits in the manifesto or not, of that sense of we are a collection of humans kind of patching together many great things right now, and we'd love to have more of you. So the manifesto in itself is an invitation, and also what we say about what we mean when we say partnership. What do we mean when we say experiment? And maybe that's linking to stuff we already have. I feel like it's leading out with, this is who we are, and we want you.
I always appreciate how you talk about that. I wanted it in the record.
Well, are there other thoughts around, when that, a manifesto or something that, whether people knock on our doors or things we point to that you think of?
I want to read to you. I was reading Paul Bourne's book again about community conversation. Paul is part of the
Tamarack.
Yeah. So he was saying expectations flow from engagement. Listening to others, or what he calls entering into their meaning, and joining creative energies to dream of real solutions that lead to engagement, shared commitment, and implementing decisions. So I like that notion of what you said, Rebecca, about where people can look at this and see themselves in it. Right? They're already doing some of, maybe not they're doing everything, but they're doing some of that. And in seeing themselves in it, they automatically think of you as sojourners on this journey they're on. Right? Because I'm on this journey and I see that you have the same kinds of things. And that's very attractive because we're always looking for people to hold hands with and walk on this journey together. Right, so I like that notion of having something like that where people can see themselves.
And Rebecca, I was thinking as you were speaking that that kind of manifesto or statement needs to be up so that it's actually even for the people that don't know us, that we're just thinking we'd like to get to know us. That's the kind of thing that they will need to be intrigued by. It's exactly, and so it's right there at the second or third box, as well as when we give the invitation, which then gets more specific. I'd like to talk to you about the Odyssey because we're working on it.
I also think that initial engagement is really as much of it is about what is in it for me, from the perspective of somebody who's wants to engage, what's in it for me. You can also engage people from a perspective of what can I teach them, right? So if we went and said, we want to learn from you, that is engaging because a lot of people want to share what they have, the knowledge, again, the expertise and whatnot. So whatever we put in has to have that sense of, we're not just here to tell you what we have found works, but we really truly want to learn from you because you are on this journey that we are, right? So what have you learned?
Who was it who said just last time we talked that every time somebody new joins the class, the whole class changes? It's when you add one more person to the stone soup recipe, the soup is different.
Yeah, the note that I jotted down as you were talking, Rebecca, is that the manifesto is a statement of who we are in a way that emphasizes why we are. Why this is important to us, why this would be important to you, where that connection is. The very much in Shiva's the what's in it for them.
And what can they give to you? I mean, I think that's that open door for more learning is certainly a part of it.
Yeah, I'm sort of smiling that it's feeling like my list of Food Network questions. I don't know if I've shared this with you, Shiva. Have I shared the Food Network thing with you?
No. But it sounds intriguing.
I love the Food Network. I love it for learning from it, and I love it for falling asleep. And I have watched for years the next Food Network star. And the reason that I watch it is I learned so much from the way they coach them about how to be on camera and how to tell your story and how to And I used to love when Alton Brown was doing it because he is the best teacher in the world. And I would just learn so much, and I've got pages scribbled. I actually can't watch the next Food Network star to try to fall asleep because I'm so intrigued by what I learned. And what I finally came to about a year or so ago is that they're constantly telling them, don't forget to tell your story, and don't forget to tell where your expertise comes from, and don't forget to tell, first of all, coming from the negative, don't forget. And they get in front of the camera and they're like, I can't remember all this shit, and they go blank. And what had occurred to me is if I didn't have to remember the answers, if I could just remember the questions. And so I came up with 4 questions, and in the language, in the parlance of the Food Network, it would be, what is your dish? Why is this your dish? What does your dish mean to me? And how do you make it? And so, what is our dish? We're creating the future, or we're catalytic thinking, or what's exciting? Okay, why is this you? What's exciting for me? I mean, Dimitri and I were joking on the way over to the wedding the other day. It's like, okay, remember the Food Network questions. Why is this exciting to me, and what's exciting for you? And so when I would say, how about the systems you encounter every day? And they go, oh yeah. And so, I mean, it was just, but it's just those 4 questions. And so it's occurring to me that the manifesto is the Food Network questions. Who are we? Why is this important? Why us? Why us? Why you? And how do we do this? Change the questions you ask. Or, I mean, so there's, thank you, Guy Fieri.
Thank you, Alex Guarnicheri.
When I'm looking at my November scribbles around kind of, action steps coming from this flow chart, and it was around, building spreadsheet, which the gorgeous beauty reality of having Laura here in our world to also be thinking about that with all of her wisdom. Adding people, which includes right out of the gate, who's on that list, which we all have scribbles in our notebooks, yet creating that system and process around it. And that also includes an element of research, so that's been ongoing, and Anne has, you've got what you've shared with us and much more. And talking about what kind of canned content, as we said, which is, the manifesto, stories, and, we could explore that more deeply about what is the stuff that would need to be in place for, let's just for someone to internally to feel conditions for success for that individual to do this first intentional outreach around seeking partners. What needs to be in place for that first conversation? And if we're not there yet in our conversation today, you can pull me back. So,
well, there's part of me that's feeling ready to explore the question Shiva has been asking since before we even started officially meeting, which is, who are we going to talk to? And starting to think about the action steps of that come out of this. I think are very clear. I think the pieces that you're talking about, Rebecca, come out of what do people need to know, and what do they need to know and have in order to be excited and intrigued and curious. And in part it's referrals, that has to do with the who. In part it's the stories, in part it's the simple statements, the various pieces that will make sense to various different people, and the list of who to talk to. And in some of those cases, we won't need a lot, because if we're talking to people who already know us, we can build this plane while we're flying it. We can simultaneously pull the pieces together. What I think that will do is give the people who are doing the sleuthing practice. So that when we're talking to people that we haven't met yet, or we're meeting by referral, or we're meeting by whatever, that we feel more comfortable, we feel more confident, and in that practice of the conversation, we'll be creating in our own minds, oh, this is a phrasing that worked for me, and this is a story that people seem to resonate with when they're in the X industry. So that we can keep coming back and feeding that and develop the pieces as we're going. But I'm sort of feeling like the starting to think about the types of people that we want to engage in what order.
Okay.
And the thing that I love is that you can always tell when you're done talking about conditions because everybody's talking about actions. When one person's talking about actions, then yeah, but when everybody's sort of like, and then we can do this, and then we can do that, and it's like, yeah, okay, we're ready.
So part of what we had talked about last time was as far as the types of people, and I wonder if we can go back to people who we know are curious, or people who we have seen, really wanting to bring out the best in themselves and others, or people who we know are hungry for change, or people who we know are have shown a lot of courage and are open to the idea of change because they can deal with it a little easier. Or people who have been involved, who've been change makers, in their own industries or whatever. Are those the sort of characteristics that we can sort of, use to find the type of people that we want?
The word that I've always used in terms of partnering in general at creating the future is influencers, people who have the ability to create ripples, where connecting with, and sometimes you're talking to 6 people who are fascinating before you find who that influencer is in that field. So it's I'm feeling very yes and with what you're saying, Shiva. That where are the fields, where are the places that make sense for us to be partnering to further the mission, and who are the influencers in that? And in many cases, we're not going to know until we have those conversations. But who's the person or the group that is just that everybody's looking to them as the early adopters and the ones who they want to emulate and the ones they want to listen to and the and I agree. Just looking at the various different fields, we're not going to know in many cases until we have those conversations. So I'm thinking about different kinds of groups. I'm thinking about foundation leaders who are at the cutting edge. And the thing that I love about foundation leaders is that they are watching trends. Sometimes they don't even realize they're watching trends. They're seeing trends because people come to them with all these different proposals. And they start to see, oh, we got 20 proposals last year about blank, and we'd never gotten that before. So just their understanding of what they're seeing, how they're responding to it, what are they, I've always found that there's a lot of power in their ability to influence beyond their dollars. The knowledge that they have of what's going on out in the world. And I think these days it's the same with social investors.
Morning's Chronicle of Philanthropy has an article about the Nathan Cummings Foundation, which has just put $438 billion of its corpus against social impact investing and mission investing.
Wow. Wow.
So those are people that we should say this is really interesting. What we'd like to explore that, because mission investment is exactly what we're about, and we need to know more about what you're saying.
There's also, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the social capital movement, SOCAP, but SOCAP people, they come from different places, but they're primarily the huge rise in the social capital movement happened after the crash in 2008, when so many people who had made so much money in the stock market basically came to Jesus. I mean, they really were like, what am I doing with my life? I have made a ton of money, and where is the meaning in my life? And so it's really looking at the nexus between social good and capitalism, and really exploring, where is that nexus? And they're more on a journey than anything else, more on a journey of exploration than anything else. But there's some really brilliant minds in that realm, who are really exploring that nexus between capitalism and social good.
Be interesting to see who is working with the Nathan Cummings Foundation on this change, because I'm sure they've tapped into those brilliant minds. Just go out and buy Sara Lee a lot, because that's where their money comes from.
It'll be a stretch, but if I have to, I will.
You force yourself, that cheesecake goes down so hard.
Love their pound cake. Love their pancake. Where else are we seeing influencers in that field? There's media people. There's some media people.
There's some activists too, but in large social movements.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to have the conversation with Warren Buffett, so whoever sets that up, I would like to be a part of it.
No problem. I'll put you down.
Thanks.
Well, and that brings up philanthropists in general.
Well, I'm not entirely kidding. Warren Buffett is a rather enlightened philanthropist in his own way, and so, yeah.
I wasn't kidding. You're on the list.
Okay, fine. And Shiva, you sit adjacent to one of the most enlightened bodies of philanthropists I've ever worked with in the Bay Area. There's got to be somebody there that's a leader.
So there's a lot of people here. Mm-hmm. And I can say with 80% certainty that I doubt any of them have been approached with this kind of what we are trying to make possible here. I think because they have been approached so many times, they're extremely selective and very choosy. And so a lot of times I have found getting to the real philanthropists, you can't go to them directly. It has to be through an intermediary of some sort, right? Whether it's a friend that they trust, or it's, a lot of times it's their accountant, and it's their lawyers, and it's their dentist. And it's the, so there's a lot of that. I'm hoping that as time goes by, we will have hundreds of people who can talk about, creating the future and all of that, and it would just reach a tipping point. But I think until then, it's good to also consider to approach a lot of these through others, right? As opposed to putting them on our top of the list and saying, okay, we're going to go to this philanthropist and that. But just saying, well, who do we know who knows that person, who that person respects and might be willing to listen to. But yeah, absolutely, philanthropists are definitely should be included in the group.
But estate planners also,
Mm-hmm.
and certified.
Well, and I think that they're two different questions. I think when we're looking at what are the types of people who are the influencers, then there's there's coming at it from two different directions. If there's somebody you want to meet Warren Buffett, we figure out what is the path to Warren Buffett. Sometimes it's just, I just want to sit in a room with that person, have a conversation. That's all I want to do. I want it. I want his brilliance in my presence. And we figure out that path. The other end of that is that we're having conversations just with people that we know and asking, who do you know who's influencing this sphere? Who are the philanthropists you know who are playing in this arena? And they could be playing in a tiny little way, and they could be playing in a huge way. They could be playing very, very locally. I have a dear friend who is very, very active in our local Tucson community and is constantly connecting me with people who do innovative and interesting things just in this one tiny little sphere of Tucson. They're people who then know people who are doing, okay, so the kinds of stuff you're doing here locally, do you know anybody who's doing this on a regional basis? Do you know anybody who's doing this on a global basis? And so again, there's going to be different ways that we get to those people, but I think for right now, just identifying that philanthropists are sometimes, some are checkbook philanthropists, and some are global thinking philanthropists, and just understanding that's going to be a group, and then we'll figure out, for each of them, are we rippling out from who we know, or are we aiming at the path to Warren Buffett so we can all have dinner?
Well, and I think, if we could, good steak too, because he's in that great beef area.
I'll have this salad.
I think that we really just want to sit down and have a talk with Warren Buffett and gather in some of his brilliance and see some of his global view, because he is an influencer. And if we can have that conversation and share with him what creating the future is about and how he sees that working in his world and so forth, that I think is all we want from him. We don't want him to write a check. And we need to make that very clear. I think.
Well, and I think the importance
hard for a philanthropist who is approached directly to say, "Oh, they're coming for my checkbook."
Yeah. And Warren Buffett being the fill in the blank. It really, but and I think that's for all of the people on the list, is that awesome things will emerge if we just want to learn about what they're seeing in the world, and we don't know what will emerge. There's going to be, if our goal is to find partners that want to march hand in hand alongside of us to accomplish this cool thing in whatever way that winds up manifesting itself, then being really clear. I think I've shared with you guys the most successful sleuthing. We did it for both diaper banks when we formed it in Phoenix and we formed it in Tucson, and we walked in the door and we said, we're not asking for money now, and we're not going to ask for money later. We want your wisdom. We want to know what's going on in the community. We want to know, and it's a different conversation.
You have two fundraisers in the room who know that you never say no for the donor.
I'm not going to ask. See, that's the difference. I'm not going to say no to you, but I'm not going to ask. And I've also shared the story of the foundation gave us a $75,000 startup grant in Phoenix, because after we spent 3 hours learning about what he knew about the community, his parting words to us were, "And when you are ready to look for money, you will come see us, won't you?" That's the difference.
And that's how it works best.
And that's the difference. And so the insistence of, we're not here to ask for your money, and we're not going to be back later to say, oh, and by the way, we're really not here to ask for your money. We want to know what you know. And if we're not sincere about that, I can smell it a mile away. Because I get a million a day notes from people who just want to, and it's awesome, and it's very nice that people think enough of me that they want to do something with me, but you can smell it. I just want to have a conversation. Yeah.
I'm thinking about academic institutions, research, because they are studying what's going on out there. They know the humans. They're writing case studies and tracking. So.
Yes, and in a million different departments.
Mm-hmm.
And the same department in one university is going to be completely different stuff than the other. Yes. There's also, so Justin and I have been playing with this with the board stuff of who else cares about this. This basically is the question: is who else cares about this? And it's intermediaries. So intermediaries, like, I mean, foundations are intermediary. Anybody at this level is an intermediary, but specifically Board Source, the Alliance for Nonprofit Management, grant makers for more effective organizations, statewide associations of nonprofits, chambers of commerce, those kinds of folks who are, their job is to know who's thinking what. So maybe aggregators is a way of thinking of them. I'm not sure what the word is, but. There's also government people. We talked about activists and large social movements, but there's people working in various government roles. It could be elected officials. It could be, I mean, it really just depends. Again, it's like the academic institutions. It's different everywhere, but there's people in very targeted, specific places in government departments in the U.S., government ministries elsewhere that are doing really cool stuff and know who's doing really cool stuff. What you thinking, Ann? You got a smile.
I was thinking about restoring the State Department after Mr. Pompeo gets through with it. And, actually, no, I was thinking, when you get right down to it, government and politicians, government officials who are professional government functionaries, if you will, they manage an entire area of thought that doesn't get affected very often, and is at the moment in life opposed to the media, which is there originally to keep their heels to the fire. So while we're working with media, we may want very much to go into government. And what I'm hearing also is an echo of our friend from Crossing Chasm, just simply saying we need to get some priorities straight and manage. These need to be manageable choices that we start making. I really believe Al Gore is an important influence in the world of the environmental cause, although he's not by any means the only one. But starting with Al Gore is a little ambitious, I think.
I don't know. I'm convinced we're 3 degrees of separation away from any human on the planet.
I agree with you on that, but I also know that sometimes the 3 degrees take longer with some people than they take with others.
And we get to practice along the way.
Well, yeah, I just wrote down the name of a local politician that I'm going to start my practice on.
So when we're done with Al Gore and Warren Buffett, who else?
I do wonder, because in all of these collective impact things, one of the things you really have to pay attention to is the community. You know, it's the community that's getting affected by the system, in this case, whatever the system might be. And I do wonder at what point do we feel that the community is just as important to engage, because they're the ones that are living through these systems. So there is that, upcry of, I want change, and so I am going to force my politician, or I'm going to force, however it is people think of this. I'm not saying that is the way creating the future thinks, but that's how people think. So what would it take for us? What conditions do need to be in place for us to engage the community at large? Because I think in some way that's a different, I see it as different extent of logistics and all of that. And yes, teaching and bringing the message out to as many people as we can. But is that something that we also want?
Are you seeing this in the partner conversations? Tell me more about what
Well, I am cognizant of the fact that in the fundraising world, so often what we fall on is, okay, who has money? Who can we go get money from, right? Right. Where the goal is always to change something. And so what happens is, in that effort to go get the money so we can change whatever it is we want to change it the way we want to change it, because we have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the expertise, what ends up happening is the community gets left completely. It's like you don't even ask the community, do you even want this change? I know this is a change that's good for you, but do you even want this change? And we don't engage them. Or we don't engage them in a meaningful way. So what happens is a lot of stuff is top down, right? We have this big idea, we have found somebody who's going to pay for it, and so we're going to come in and this is what we're going to give to you. And I know that in the collective impact model, that approach has not been as successful unless and until you truly engage the community.
Right.
So the question in my mind is, outside of the influencers,
right,
how do we engage, or are we thinking about engaging the community?
The thing that's occurring to me is that as partners in projects, we're looking for influencers. For every project, it must be done with the people that are going to be creating the change, because the people who create the change for a food bank's just a group of people who want things to change in a community. The people who create the change are the people who eat differently and et cetera. They're the people. And so in my mind, and this is just my perception, is that who we will partner with is different than, once we're partnering, who we will engage on whatever it is we're partnering on. But I'm trying to see where you're seeing, because that's in my brain. I'm trying to see where your brain is going in terms of the specifics of partnering and engaging community. I'm still trying to see what you're saying.
Right. So you're thinking, as we think of the specific systems and find partners to come up with specific projects, then at that point we will engage the community that's affected by that system.
It's the only way we do it, yeah.
Right. So I'm seeing it in a I think in some way more generalized and maybe not as effective way, or as possible way, that there is a community at large that's affected by all systems. Right? All of us, pretty much. If you live in a country, you're affected by all the systems that are part of that country. So, is there benefit to furthering this dream of engaging a much larger community that could give you their wisdom?
Yes.
While we continue to bring in partners and go do our sleuthing and all of that, is there benefit to having 400 people, 40 people talk as opposed to the four of us, and coming up with, because even those members of community, even if they're just nurses and doctors or whatever they are, everybody knows somebody. So that's your 3 degree of separation, right? So is there benefit to that at this point? I don't know. I'm asking. I'm asking.
I'm always in a yes and. A couple of things occur to me just in terms of expediency of time. Of there's right now 4 of us talking, and who do we choose? Who do we prioritize to talk to? One of the matrices that I like working with asks just very basic questions. One is on a scale of 1 to 3, how much does this person love us? Doesn't know who we are. I knows who we are, but we'll answer the phone and would lay down on railroad tracks for us. How connected is this person to somebody who is an influencer and is creating lots of ripples? They are the influencer themselves. They have the ear of an influencer and can introduce us. They don't at all. And again, on a scale of 1 to 3. And just very simple questions like that to be able to winnow out who do we want to start talking with. So for instance, my best friend owns a PR firm that does work all over the state through various government systems. She'd lay down on railroad tracks for me and could probably introduce me to somebody. Okay, so that's a 3 in that category and a 2 in that category. And just listing out. So I think that that's where my yes and brain goes, Shiva, is as we're listing all the people that we know, just sort of saying, okay, if what we're looking for is access to people who are of influence, and simultaneously being able to share the story with people who influence in their own spheres and in their own businesses and their own whatevers. That's where my sort of yes and brain goes. But again, I'm not. Is that sort of the question that you're asking? I'm not.
I think I'm just thinking out loud more than anything else.
I like what you're thinking, so
thank you for being there.
I'm enjoying playing with it.
I would like to hear more about that 400 people in the conversation, because what I'm hearing is that our mission is our purpose is to spread the mission of creating the future, is to open those minds, get people out of the amygdala, have them free to work towards a compassionate, humane society. That's what we're about. That's what we want to accomplish. And notice that the 4 people in this conversation came to this conversation because we wanted to. So the most important thing I think about your 40 and your 400 would be that for that conversation to work, they'd have to want to come. They'd have to self-select in some way. And I suspect that will happen. The reason we're looking at influencers is we want to make many ripples out of anything that we do because we're just 4 people. Eventually, what's going to happen, though, is that Hildy's going to get a call, or Rebecca, or you, from somebody, and they're going to say, we have 400 people in the audience who really want to hear about catalytic thinking. And that's when you'll go and get 400 people, because you're not going to go and say, this is what catalytic thinking is and you should do it. You're going to say, well, this is what catalytic thinking is. It's a framework. How would you work with it? What could it make possible for you? And you'd have 400 people in the conversation. So
And I think that the ripples are going to, no matter, the reason that in my mind it's always been about influencers is no matter how many people we are, we're not 7 billion. And the fact that we want to see this change happen now, that we don't want to wait another 100 years, that the only way it happens now is if we are talking to people who can create those ripples now. And that once we're 400, we're going to say, but we're only 400 people. And that's what winds up happening is so who are those 400? Okay, they better be people who can, and that's really what, but again, there's so much meat to what you're talking about, Shiva, because that's I mean, what we're really talking about here is accomplishing the mission by accomplishing the mission. You know, I mean, we're having conversations about having conversations, and that's the thing that's exciting to me, is that for every one of the people that we come in contact with, that once we start having conversations, once we start just having side conversations and telling people what we're doing, you know, so what are you working on at Creating the Future these days? Oh, we're working on this boffo thing, and oh yeah, really? You know, sort of the energy creating energy thing, and that's why I keep going to the yes and on it.
Do we think bloggers might be influencers? Because there are some people who have hundreds of thousands of followers.
Wow.
Yeah, I was thinking about media people, but I think bloggers is absolutely part of, yeah.
And along that made me think of podcasts, how they're huge followings to some people.
Yes. Yep.
There are also some artists that are extremely socially connected. And so they come at it from their perspective. There's actually a nice one of those in San Francisco. That is an organization of artists that are socially connected and can express that next social thing through their art.
That reminds me of, and again, we were talking about activists in large social movements. There are, that sort of fits in there, because I'm thinking about, okay, there's like coalition's not exactly the right word, but there's key players in the environmental movement, in the that are not Al Gore, that are influencers in a different way than I can stand on a stage and be Al Gore.
Actually, I don't think of Al Gore's influence as being the moments that he makes the films and stands on the stage. The moments that he's influential is over dinner and on the golf course. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about other nonprofits?
That's sort of where I was going with the yeah.
There's, what is it, 1.5 million of them now in the US? There has to be, we can.
Yeah, and I see some of them being in real leadership positions in their field, and I guess that was what was triggering for me.
You mentioned AFP and the Association of Nonprofits. Another one would be CASE. The CASE conference is huge, and it's really very influential.
So this is different than the Case Foundation, yes?
Yeah, it's Advancement of Science and Education, and
Okay.
It's actually probably mostly fundraisers, but it's very university advancement to the officers.
Gotcha.
And
I'm
thinking
getting
about,
excited to get started.
I was thinking about where there's already, there'll be gatherings that you'll read about. I'm just thinking about, we talked about where people are already coming together and sharing things. So it could even be cross industries, where there are people who are playing in this space, you know, looking at systems change and sharing their stories. I'm just, where, like, I guess that's like where are spaces we could show up in, or know someone who could start perking catalytic thinking in that space. And I just want to be mindful on time, because we have this meeting till 30. It's 20 after.
After. This is a great list. We get started on this list, it's going to take us to the rest of who it needs to be. We're going to go, oh, you know who we remember? Who we forgot? Yeah. So what I'm sensing is a next step, tell me what you guys think, is that we each start just making lists of everybody we know connected with something in this list. And they don't have to be influencers. We just need to make the list of everybody we know who is associated with this in some way, because they're the ones that we can pick up the phone and say, so you're working in the nonprofit management department at your local university. Who do you know that's the influencer? Who creates the ripples in the university system at you're just an adjunct, But that's, is that a path that seems right to you guys? Is there something else that you see? Anne, I would defer to you especially.
Why?
Because I love you. But because of your experience in all of this, in doing, I guess all three of you I would defer to, actually. All of you are fundraisers. I'm the one who's not, so I would defer not to me.
Well, I'm looking at the head of the Department of Education and the head of the business school at the university in my town. And a man who has up until recently been director of the Downtown Association, and who has successfully removed the pedestrian mall that we so carefully installed in the 1960s. But these are influencers, and these are people that that I think have a lot to say. And I'm also very aware that one of them has never thought of anything along these lines. But he hates the system.
So that adds another category, which is just people we know who are influencers.
Yeah, people we know who are influencers, and also I think it's really important to recognize that there are people in these groups, and it's something we have to determine when we're setting priorities, is there are people on that list of 4 people I just gave you. There are 2 who are going to be what I call tough nuts to crack. They're just going to say, you can't change the system. It's too entrenched. I mean, come on, just get with it, you know, and so forth and so on. And there will be a lot of questions about changing the questions, and it will go very, very, very short distance. Others will be people who will say, oh, hey, let me put you in touch with so-and-so.
So Paul Bourne defines influencer as a person who has the power to convene. Not necessarily the person with power.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we've been thinking, pretty close to it. Yeah.
I see them as people who people listen to and respect.
It is possible to ask people who is the influencer that you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Rebecca, I am going to type into the chat this list that we've come up with so far. If and just letting you know.
We should at some point on these things, especially after you get back from Thailand, we should do some practicing.
Mhm. Absolutely. And while I'm gone, I will be following any conversations you guys will have. I just won't participate because, you know, it's 14 hours difference from California. So this time is like 4 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if my brain is going to be working.
And you're on holiday. Whatever that looks like for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you will be on holiday. We have Anna's in the house and Laura will be back. So I can send out a scheduling email to those of us who will be in the United States to get together. What feels right with your life, Anne, for our next meeting as far as on your calendar? You're on mute before you tell us.
The 27th actually looks pretty good. That's 2 weeks from today.
Great, because that will also give everyone time.
I think the 27th is really sucked in for me.
Oh wait, is that a Monday? Oh yeah. How about the week of the 27th?
It's the 27th.
It's a Tuesday.
Oh yeah. Is there something later that week? Like Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday is equally good for me.
Let's see. Wednesday. Hildy and I have a conversation at 12 Pacific.
Let me see if I
Well, that day is clear entirely for me. So
Okay.
I can be slotted into any convenient time for you.
So you're flexible if it was morning or afternoon.
Right.
I can, so that way we can check in with Laura and see what works best for her that day. So I'll send that out.
Okay.
So now let's take a moment to take a deep breath and some reflections about what is standing out. Or are we reflecting back through the lens of catalytic listening to see what strengths and values and outcomes we heard from this session through that lens? Strengths, what do we have to build on?
Each other.
What?
Each other.
Yeah. We know a lot of people.
Yep.
We all know everybody we need to know.
I think a strength is we're ready to have these conversations. Because we've been talking about this, there's this, and we're now at a strength is we're at the place that we're ready as a movement.
Got one hell of a story to tell.
More than one.
Values. What matters most?
I come back to the word that Shiva uses so often, which is integrity. That importance that we keep talking about of our having integrity. That this is about finding real partners who want to play with us and walk side by side with us and are looking for somebody to walk side by side with, and not about money. And to me, personally, that is a deep value.
I would also say it's about those partners who are willing to hold our hand.
Yeah.
And we're going to need them for so much of this. And they're willing to reach out their hand to us and say, okay, come on, let's walk together. I'll pull you and you pull me. We'll make this happen.
Yeah. That whole invitation that you talked about last time, Shiva, of come create with us. Can we create together? I love that.
And the outcomes.
Have a list.
Yeah. The whole list we came up with last time. When I heard the outcomes were conversations. The means and the ends were conversations.
And for me, much better clarity around some of the things that I was questioning and wondering about and not knowing definitions and thinkings around and all of that. So I appreciate that.
And an outcome perhaps is another, I guess, a demonstration of this shit works, because we have walked through the framework on this journey, and it doesn't take a long, this is meeting 4 of this cadence at this time in life, and we're at the place of moving forward with action.
I think that speaks to a strength, Rebecca, is just the framework.
Yes, it does.
And the values embedded in it. I also think it is a strength that we continue to be dedicated to finding language that is precise and that resonates, and to, when we have questions and assumptions and wondering what the assumptions are embedded in language, that we're asking that and we're parsing it and we're playing with it, and we're not making the assumption that we have the answer to it.
I also appreciate the fact that we're not coming at it from a position of marketing, branding, and all of that kind of stuff. We need to have our 3-minute, elevator. We have our 20 seconds. Just so sick of that.
I've just got Food Network questions.
That's a strength.
Yes, it's the Food Network framework, actually.
There we go.
All the things of not to do.
They all feel contrived and smarmy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can smell it coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a delicious facilitation today, so thank you, Rebecca.
Oh, it was so I thank you all.
Well, and you know, that speaks to another strength, is the power of what it feels like when everybody understands the framework and is working through it as we're asking the questions. Shows what's possible.
Well, with much gratitude, we now conclude meeting 4. And we wish Shiva off with a big fat kiss. And we cannot wait to hear, where in the world is Shiva?
Yes.
We'll welcome you back in a few weeks. So let us know when you have resurfaced, and we will include you on all the emails, knowing you're on vacation and they're there for when you would like to see them.
Have a wonderful time.
Oh,
That's
can't wait
great.
to see pictures.
Yes, only one. More than that is just it's just too self-oriented after that.
No.
You're talking to the wrong group.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is the group that says, "Oh, show us your pictures from 1982."
Okay. I will send you a beach picture. How's that?
Anything and everything.
Yes, I want to see the pictures that you are the most excited about. That at the end of the day, when you look through your photos and you go, I want to see the ones you're most excited about.
You got it.
Okay.
Have safe journeys.
Thank you. You all be safe and enjoy. Spring is coming next week. First day of spring. So
Promise.
enjoy. Keep enjoying that plum tree, and
I will.
yeah,
I think
that's
the
great.
rain is pretty hard, but it's lovely.
Thank you all for the conversation today.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.